Hello and welcome to another Dune video. If you want a summary on the first book, I made one too, which I'll link down below. This book is a summary of book 2, Dune Messiah. There are 6 books in total, but I only have the first 3, which were sold in this volume called the Dune Trilogy. Anyway, the book starts with one historical account of Paul, or Muad'Dib's imperial reign. He's an imperial Mentat emperor who is really powerful because he's received Bene Gesserit training from his mother Jessica, and his intellect as a Mentat is unparalleled. Paul is also the Kwisatz Haderach, something the Bene Gesserit had been seeking for generations. So he's a lot of powerful things, and he's formed a political alliance through marriage to Irulan, the daughter of the Padishah emperor. More on that marriage in a bit. So Dune Messiah takes place 12 years into Paul's reign. Paul and his Fremen defeated the Harkonnen armies, the Sardaukar legions, brought the Spacing Guild to its knees, and he installed his sister Alia on the religious throne. Having Dune meant that Paul had monopoly of the spice melange, and we're reminded of why it's so important. Without melange, the sisterhood's reverend mothers could not perform their feats of observation and human control. The guild's steermen could not navigate across space. Billions upon billions would die of addictive withdrawal, and Paul wouldn't be able to prophesy without it. They hint at Muad'Dib's eventual defeat, possibly at the hands of the guild or the sisterhood. Other historical accounts point to spies in Muad'Dib's household. We're then introduced to Scytale, a Tleilaxu face dancer. These are beings who are able to wear different faces and present themselves in different bodies. Scytale is in a meeting with an envoy of the guild called Edric, some kind of man-fish hybrid, and the Reverend Mother of the Bene Gesserit. Paul's wife Irulan is also present. She's Paul's wife, whom he married out of convenience, but Scytale reminds us that they don't mate. The 4 of them are conspiring on ways to assassinate Paul without making him a martyr. They don't want him to have monopoly over the melange, and the guild also suspects Paul of wanting to make himself a god. He also just has had too much power for too long. So Irulan, Paul's wife, chosen for political reasons, wants to give birth to an heir. She wants to be the founding mother of the royal dynasty, but Edric reminds her that unless she conspires with them, it won't happen because she doesn't share a bed with Paul. If you remember, Paul is committed to Chani, his Fremen concubine, as Edric called her. Chani hasn't given birth to an heir because Irulan has been secretly administering a contraceptive. Irulan also reports everything that happens in the imperial household to the Bene Gesserit. She isn't convinced that they can defeat him though. He's too powerful and he has ocular vision, which means he can see into the future. The Reverend Mother assures her that he does have weak spots because he is human after all. They consider using Jessica to achieve their goal, but Edric then explains that maybe they can use a ghost to contaminate the Emperor. The Sardaukar who killed Duncan Idaho, a swordsman loyal to the House of Atreides, could have preserved some of his flesh to make something called a Gola. Since Duncan Idaho was one of the finest swordsmen in history, advisor to the Atreides, and a military genius, it would have been a waste to just let his flesh go to waste when they could have used it to revive him at a later time. So the conspirators are going to gift this Gola, a creature called Hate, to Paul, and this creature will poison Paul's psyche. This Gola, who is a Mentat as well, will also distract Alia, Paul's sister, with its maleness. Then we get to see the Emperor's household. As mentioned, Paul has ruled for 12 years now with Chani at his side. He has the blue eyes of the Fremen, and this blue is also the mark of spice addiction. Chani comes in one evening and she says that she wants to talk about Irulan, Paul's wife's desire for a child. Paul wonders why she's bringing this up now, and Chani says that it might be a good idea to get Irulan pregnant because that would make Irulan's friends question her loyalty, and that's good for them because if they don't trust Irulan, they won't have much use for her. Paul doesn't like this idea, saying that he swore never to take Irulan to his bed. That's Chani's place. When Chani tells him he must have an heir, Paul figures that Chani, because she can't bear him one, thinks that someone has to, so it might as well be Irulan. Irulan had come to Paul earlier to tell him that she wanted an heir. When she tells him that she's his wife, he chose her, he says that fate chose her to play a part. Her father and the Bene Gesserit chose her. He tells her that she may take a lover and be discreet about it, but she has to remain childless. Where the throne is concerned, I control what blood is heir to it. The Bene Gesserit doesn't control this, nor does the guild. Paul also tells Chani later that he doesn't trust Irulan. She has so many plots and schemes going on that if he were to give into one of her plots, who knows what that might set off. We're also told about one group of people, among many, who hate Paul, the water sellers. Because of Paul's generosity with dispensing it and transforming the desert planet into a water-rich paradise, their way of life was rather ruined. And even the people for whom water was really difficult to come by hated Paul for changing their ways and their way of life. Scytale then meets with a Fremen named Farrokh. Farrokh explains his observations about Muad'Dib's living arrangements, his movements, security detail, security of the Imperial Keep. They discuss ways to possibly breach the Emperor's fortress. After he's gotten everything he needs, Scytale pierces Farrokh's neck with a poison needle, killing him. Then we get to see Alia, Paul's sister. She's almost 16 years old now, and she's about to have a meeting with the Imperial Council. She's also a reverent mother without motherhood, as Paul says. Virgin priestess, object of fearful veneration for the superstitious masses. She'd been an embryo in the womb when her mother had survived the raw melange poison. Mother and unborn daughter had become reverent mothers simultaneously. The matter of Irulan giving birth to an heir is brought up once again in the council meeting, and Paul rejects the proposal. He says that were Irulan not bound by the commands of the Bene Gesserit, if she did not seek this out of desire for personal power, his answer might be different. Later, as the guild's entourage approaches the Imperial Keep, Duncan Idaho is with them, even though this should be impossible. Alia knows of him from her mother's memories from when she was in the womb, and of course Paul actually recognizes him. Alia correctly guesses that this Duncan must have been constructed from the dead flesh by the Tleilaxu into a Gola. One of the guildsmen offers to Paul this Duncan Idaho Gola and introduces him as Hate. Paul talks to him, questions him, and Hate tells him that while he has no memories of his former life, there are things that are somehow familiar to him. Alia doesn't sense any outward deception from the Gola, but she senses that there must be some kind of deep danger in this gift brought to them by the guild. While Paul accepts the Gola, he knows that it's bait, and he's sure that the Reverend Mother is behind it. When Paul asks Hate why he was trained and why he was sent to him, Hate says that he was meant to destroy Paul. He asks Hate then what he should do to protect himself, and Hate answers that Paul should send him away. Paul obviously thinks that all of this honesty is by design, that it doesn't matter that he knows that this is a weapon to be used against him. Stilgar, Paul's Fremen advisor, is not comfortable with the Gola, but Paul decides to accept and keep him, but just to be careful. Alia, meanwhile, just as planned, feels an attraction to the Gola, Hate. Tleilaxu restoration had given him youth, an innocent intensity which called out to her. She felt positive desire to be near this new man, perhaps to touch him. He's a danger to both of us, she realizes. The Reverend Mother, meanwhile, has been imprisoned, and Irulan goes to visit her. The Reverend Mother has lost faith in Irulan to birth an heir. She feels now that they should exploit Paul's closeness to his sister Alia. The depth of their communion must be exploited. Opportunities must be created to throw them together in privacy. Intimate encounters must be arranged. The possibility of eliminating the concubine must be explored. Grief dissolved traditional barriers. Irulan does not like this plan because if anything happens to Chani, the suspicion would fall on her. Plus, Chani has been on this Fremen diet used to promote fertility, so she could already be with child. The Reverend Mother is furious. Who knew what suppressions and genetic entanglements Chani might introduce from her wild Fremen strain? The sisterhood must only have a pure line. An abortifact must be introduced into Chani's food or drink, or she must be killed. An heir to the throne from that source must be prevented at all costs. Alia, meanwhile, is going through some kind of sexual awakening, coming into womanhood. She's restless and it's noticeable, so it's decided by Paul and Stilgar that they find a mate for her, to wed as soon as possible. The three also get intel that the guild is looking to capture a sandworm to start a spy cycle. At one point, Alia and Hate are investigating the murder of a Fremen woman, and in the Thuptar on the way back, he tells her that he gets emotional when people mention his similarities to Duncan Idaho. I feel eagerness. I'm uneasy. There's a tendency to tremble, and I must devote effort to controlling it. I get flashes of imagery. It's like he's more Duncan Idaho than we or anyone else thought. They kind of passionately spar with one another, challenging each other, sparks are flying, and he kisses her. Paul is awakened by a dream vision of a lost moon, and he confides in Hate and asks him to help analyze this vision. Hate tells Paul that he's running from death and that he has delusions of immortality. Even your empire, my lord, must live its time and die. Paul eventually summons the Reverend Mother. He has a proposal for her. He tells her that Chani is pregnant. Irulan may be impregnated by Paul, though, through artificial means. The Reverend Mother tells Paul that she needs to talk to her council about this proposal first before accepting. Scytale, meanwhile, is getting restless and he wants Edric to prod the Gola to faster achieve their goals. He fears that since Paul is already making deals with a Bene Gesserit, they're at a disadvantage. He also informs Edric that Paul might choose a mate for Alia. Chani tells Paul that she's going to have a difficult time with this pregnancy and birth because of a contraceptive that Irulan had secretly administered. She wants to kill Irulan, but Paul manages to convince her not to. Chani is also still really suspicious of the Gola, whereas Paul is getting used to him and thinks of him as Duncan, pretty much. They also talk about the possibility of having the Gola restored to its previous being, something that nobody knows is actually possible. Scytale, meanwhile, manages to enter the Imperial Keep disguised as a young messenger. His goal is to eventually have Paul lose Chani, so disguised as this female messenger, he tells Paul that, well, her father wanted to speak to him and Chani about a Fremen plot against him. Bringing Chani with him is part of the trap, but Paul doesn't fall into it. He refuses, saying that he'll go alone. He goes then to see Ortime, who tells him about the Fremen working against him. Ortime also tells Paul that a dwarf, Bijas, that lives with him, supposedly discarded by the Tilaxu, has the names of all the traitors. Everything that's happening isn't quite like Paul's vision, which concerns him. Ortime's house then is burned down in an attack, but Paul and some of his men narrowly manage to escape. Paul and some of his men become blinded in the attack. In fact, Paul loses his eyes, but he still has a kind of vision, so he still sees without his eyes. The perpetrators used something called stone burner with atomic fuel, which is prohibited by the Great Convention. Eventually, Korba, one of the Fedaykin, is brought to some kind of court, accused of conspiring in this attack. This is based on evidence that Paul got from Ortime. Hate questions the dwarf Bijas at some point, and the Bijas starts humming, and Hate becomes disoriented by the humming, as though it's trying to awaken something in him. Bijas tells Hate that Paul is actually a Harkonnen as well, so it shouldn't be difficult to kill him. Hate tries to resist him, but Bijas wipes his memory of the conversation. His awareness of the instructions will be triggered when the time is right. So right now, everything is going according to plan for the conspirators who are wanting to bring Paul down. They've breached the Imperial Keep. They've installed this Duncan Idaho Gola as a distraction for Alia and as a confidant to Paul. And now Bijas has been installed to activate or compel Duncan Idaho in some way. Paul and Chani are back in the desert in Sietch as Chani's due date approaches. Both Duncan and Paul are aware now that Bijas used some kind of compulsion on Duncan. Eventually, Hate sheds the Tilaxu compulsion and he becomes Duncan Idaho completely again. So it turns out that the Tilaxu can regain the former being even though they didn't know it. This also takes Scytale by surprise. Chani gives birth to twins, a boy Leto after Paul's father and a girl Gamina. But Chani doesn't survive childbirth. Her body was overwhelmed by the speed of the birth. Scytale makes an offer to Paul to bring Chani back as a Gola. In return, Paul has to sign over all of his Chome holdings. Paul also gains some kind of sight through his children, through his son Leto, and he stabs and kills Scytale, obviously rejecting Scytale's offer to bring Chani back. Paul has Bijas killed as well. In the end, Paul, truly blind, walks out into the desert, lost forever. You see, blind Fremen were abandoned in the desert, and Paul was a Fremen after all, so he exiled himself, or rather he freed himself. He'd also make provisions for the Fremen to raise his children. Alia orders the execution of the traitors, the Reverend Mother, Korban, and the guildsmen, and it's actually Chani's death, Duncan tells Alia, that was the falling of Paul's moon. That was the vision that bothered him that he couldn't understand. Alia also has to ensure that Irulan is safe. Irulan will spend her life teaching Paul's children. Apparently she reviles the sisterhood now. Idaho comforts Alia and they profess their love to one another. The end. As for my thoughts, I felt that this one was slightly easier to read, not only because it was shorter, but because there's less world building, and I found that aspect kind of intimidating in Dune. It's been so many months since I read Dune, so I had to get used to Frank Herbert's style of writing again. There's a lot of political intrigue, and I definitely understand the people who say that these books are tricky to read. I can say that it always ends up being a rewarding reading experience though. Anyway, that was book 2. Hopefully I'll get to Children of Dune at some point. Feel free to share your thoughts down below. Thank you for watching.